Welcome back, folks, to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels, broadcasting internationally. And actually, I said City of Angels. Well, many of you can call it City of Demons, especially those of you living in New Orleans, specifically listen through 107.7 FM. UPRN, United Public Radio Network, is our home base with several affiliates around this world, and also another affiliate I brought to the table, which happens to be Deprogrammed Radio Network in the United Kingdom. Now, we always have guests that literally span across the United States and sometimes the world, but today we have a host on the West Coast with my guest on the East Coast. Now, we're going to take a little slight departure from what we talked about yesterday with UFOs, abductions, and all that really, really cool stuff, which always has amazing stories from all the witnesses who have been taken and so much more to learn. And we're going to be talking today not just about something that occurred in history. I'm talking about specifically JFK, but what is happening today, folks, in the United States. And I know during the election, and even when I've had people such as Roger Stone on, Jerome Corsi, or anything that had to do with what's going on in D.C. with Trump, with Crooked Hillary, and all those folks, even those living outside of the continental United States seem very, very interested. So before I get to this pivotal question that launches us from tying what happened 50-some years ago, almost 56 years ago, and I'm talking about JFK's assassination, with today's government shutdown, the U.S. government shutdown, the longest in history, even though it's a partial shutdown. And, of course, the crisis at the border, where the Dems are trying to have these open borders flip-flopping on their original positions through the 90s and even 2000s, all the way up until Obama's administration threw it even, before Donald Trump threw his ring into the campaign to run as president of the United States. That is when Schumer, Pelosi, and everybody else flip-flopped. Let me lay down a quick premise for you and tell you why I feel so strongly about illegal immigration. I, myself, am the product of two parents that came here as legal. That's the key word, legal migrants from Greece. They did everything they needed to do to come here with green cards, be naturalized, got jobs, learn the language. That's a key thing. They did not speak a word of English. They got here and they learned it. There was no signs written for them in Greek. There sure as heck wasn't the DMVs with Greek tests. No, they had to learn the language because they respected this country. Back in 84, 85, my grandmother from my father's side came to visit us, and she got really sick, and she was taken to the hospital, and she had been there for about 3 months. And at the time, the 3 months had accumulated into a bill that was pretty damn high, close to $150,000, because each day that she'd been in the hospital was over $1,500. Factor in inflation, take back the clock 34, 35 years, and then you could sort of see what kind of money that is today. My father goes to the hospital and decides to speak with the hospital administrator and says, is there anything we can do? I have every intention on paying you, but this bill is so high, I will lose the house I just bought for my wife and children, the very first home I bought for them. Is there something we can work out? The administrator at the hospital tells my father, asks him actually, is your mother here legally? And my father's perplexed. As a former police officer in Greece, lieutenant in the police force, he was really angered by that question, saying, why would she not be here legally? Of course she's here legally. Everything we've ever done is legal. I'm a former police officer. Nothing I've ever done has been illegal. So why start now? And he says, why are you asking me such a ridiculous question when we're here to talk about my mother's bill and her health? And then this is the part that I remembered from then and has stuck with me now and has driven my anger for those who demand rights for being illegal. The lady told my father that it's because she's here legally that we are required to pay the bill. if she was here illegally, we wouldn't have to pay a dime. So my father basically said to her, are you basically telling me that by me doing what your country, our country, has set the laws to do for people to come visit or to become citizens by the book, we are being punished, and you're telling me that if we did things illegally, we would be rewarded? And she said, in other words, yes. And that is why I've been fueled and heated when we have conversations with those who advocate for open borders, which is really a huge crisis and is at the center of this Pelosi-Schumer shutdown. Not the Trump shutdown, but the Dem shutdown. Now, I wanted to throw that little backstory in there so you guys understand why I'm so fired up about this topic. But right now, let me introduce my guest. Very famous guest, fantastic person to talk to. I go back 7 years with him this year, as a matter of fact. The very first time I brought him on the show, he said something to me that resonates with me to this day. When I was trying to figure out what we were going to talk about, he said, there's no such thing as conspiracies. There's no such thing as cover-ups. There's nothing like that. He says it's all connected. There's one big lie. There's one conspiracy, not many, one. And I realized this person knew far more than many people I've talked to. And since then, we've had so many hours. I probably have to say on air, probably over 100 in the last 7 years, not to mention the hundreds of hours off air that I've had the pleasure of speaking with him and the pleasure of calling him my friend. So without further ado, with all the hints I've thrown at you, with all the time I've given you for you guys to check out social media, then you know exactly who I'm about to introduce, and that happens to be the one and only Robert Morningstar. Robert, welcome back, dear friend. Robert, you muted?
No, I'm not muted.
There you go, my friend. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I said it's great to hear your voice on the air again.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's always a pleasure to have you on, as you noticed. I keep bringing you back on. And just like I always tell you, Robert, we never have enough time to finish talking because there's just so much.
Yeah.
So
we're living in interesting times, and that provides a material, right?
Especially right now, Robert.
Go on.
Now that Jim Marrs has passed away, you are literally the world expert on JFK. Literally, there's nobody you're second to none, and nobody can even compare because you right now, I mean, Jim Marrs and you were known as the two JFK guys to go to for the last couple of decades. But right now, since Jim passed away, you are the go-to guy. And every year on the JFK anniversary, we do a show about that. And even today, Robert, here at the end of January 2019, we're still talking about JFK. Why? Because the question looms. Does JFK's assassination have anything to do with the government shutdown? Is the shutdown, the crisis at the border, and everything else that's going on in D.C. a consequence of John F. Kennedy being assassinated in November 62, I believe, or was it 63? 63? 63 in Dallas, Texas. What do you say, Robert?
Right. Yes. Well, I see it as a direct consequence. The government shut down today, as we spoke about earlier. I see it as the culmination of consequences of the JFK assassination, in particular, because despite what the media, the Mockingbird media, tries to depict, and and all through its coercion, corruption, bribery, murder over the last 56 years. So I see it as a direct link to the assassination of President Kennedy and the removal of the cover-up. You mentioned there are no conspiracy theories. There is only one great conspiracy, and all the others are subsets of that great conspiracy. There's one great secret that this government has been bending over backwards, forwards, sideways, and killing people to keep quiet for the last 56 years. And that involved the assassination of legitimate party and Sixon and Johnson in the murder and the cover-up.
This still happens today,
you
Robert.
You are guilty.
People being silenced.
As a co-conspirator stamped and followed Lyndon Johnson blindly into. Of course, it's a pattern. It's a pattern. It's a pattern of misrule. That's what is coming to an end. The president engaged in to end the tyranny of the deep state.
Let me ask you a question, Robert. I think I've talked to you about this.
And what we have, for those who haven't been governments, yeah.
Is it true? I mean, a lot of people have speculated about this, but that every day in the Oval Office that Donald Trump and crew, Secretary of State and everybody else, say a prayer for JFK. I mean, this would be pretty hard to verify, but a lot of people are talking about this.
Yes. No, I believe it. I've heard it since the beginning of the administration. I think it started on the day that he was inaugurated. And I believe that President Trump sees himself as truth, justice, and the American regard to revealing the truth of the JFK assassination.
Yeah. And you know what? I think a lot of people even look at DJT like JFK, our modern JFK. Especially since the Democratic Party is far from being democratic. It is so far left towards socialism now. I don't even know how. JFK's got to be rolling in his grave to see what party that he represented has turned into over the last 5.5 decades. Robert, is
well,
the sound
John,
coming clear? Okay, good.
How many times? I think he's right. I think the spirit of conversation. Yeah, you go on. I wanted to say, John, how many times did I make this statement on your radio show during the primaries and the election cycle? I think Trump is the John F. Kennedy time.
Yeah,
we've been waiting for Donald Trump ever since November 22nd, 1963.
You have been saying that
since the release of the documents
since July 2015. Literally, right after that infamous time that he came down the elevator in the Trump Tower to announce, that's when you've been talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Since the day. Yep. All right. Yeah. And yet, I think for those who know, those who feel the pulse of this nation, I think every one of us who was watching that night and saw him come as candidate, all of us knew that night that he was going to be the next president of the United States. I had no doubt. People were bemoaning the fate of the campaign when when all of the it's because I know how to roast it. People look at the end product, but I ask, how did you get to that end product? Let me just give you one example of the deception of the mass. Was it the first debate? CNN came out and said that Hillary Clinton had won the debate according to 70%, actually 67%. 67% had said that Hillary Clinton had won, while every other poll in the United States and in England had been watching. So the Guardian and the English papers put out their polls, and they said that everybody thought that Trump won by at least 55, 45, 60, 40. But listen to this. So the CNN criticized the British, and they really went deeply into investigating how big was the sample, who was involved. So CNN told them that their sample, let's say the 100% sample, was divided between 76% Democrats, Republicans to start off with. So when they reported, I brought this out on several radio shows. I'm still laughing. So when they reported that 67% of their sample thought that Trump had won, they were actually admitting that 8%, 9% of Trump could have, and then they voted, and 67 voted to say that Clinton. That means that 76, right? 9% had voted for
Trump
of their sample, right? You got it?
Yes.
And
yes.
This is how they use fake statistics to fool the public. They told the public that 67% of the public thought that Trump had won the debate. When it was if they had all voted along party line, sample should have said 70 thought Trump. Only 67 said Trump won. So that means that had their minds changed during the debate by Donald Trump.
We know the mainstream media is full of lies. They've been full of lies, and that's why I'm really grateful Trump speaks directly to the people as often as he can. I mean, sometimes the only thing he could do is send out a tweet, but at least it's not intercepted by MSM and spun. I'm sure you've seen this, Robert, but this January, a recent poll came out of statistics talking about mainstream media for the calendar year of 2018, about the coverage of our president. 90% of networks talked about Trump negatively 100% of the time. Think about how drastic that is. Are you trying to tell me that only 10% of people in a handful of networks that are being watched support the president? Why would they literally be doing nothing but bashing him on 90% of the networks all the time, never having anything good to say, no matter how many promises have been kept? And always, I get, for instance, I get updates from One American News Network. I have their app on my phones. I also have ABC World News app. And it's crazy because I'll get a little flash of Mueller does this or Trump does that. And immediately I'll get the same notification from the conservative network, One American News. And even though it's the same story, Robert, the spin on it from the left makes it seem like it's totally opposite of what's talked about in the other side. Robert, you still with us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Well, that's again, they have media. Yes, I am. The right now it's conclusive working for the Department of Justice. He was an informant for the FBI. I found the telegram sent to the FBI. Imagine this. The FBI received a telegram. And when I say the FBI, I mean every office of the FBI in the United States received from an informant on November 20th, warning them that there would be an assassination plot in Dallas on the 22nd.
Mm-hmm.
Edgar Hoover.
And so, of course, the best thing they do is pull off secret service
telegrams
and
from every single FBI office, but kept.
And that wasn't the only thing that was removed, Robert. So was secret
But listen
service
to this.
detail.
In the documents that President Trump has released, part of it, yes. But listen to this. This telegram showed up in the files that has been released, and it turns out that it was Lee Oswald was the informant. Lee Oswald tried to save it in to everything. And came a telegram. 35 years since the telegram. I'd heard about it way back in the 1990s. Somebody had sent it. So I look at it, I find it. One of those amazing psychic detective things that happen. Say people that got click it. This at the top it says the name of the informant, Lee. It has two code files for him. And at the bottom there's a word that's really mangled. It's DBRO. No, it wasn't. Oh, it's 56 years and nobody has recognized that Lee Oswald put the name of his FBI handler on the telegram, but he didn't know how to spell it. The name is William DeBrois, Bruyes, William DeBrower. And so he didn't know how to spell it exactly, so he phoneticized it. So it was Lee Oswald who sent the telegram trying to save the president's life. He was down there to infiltrate and send them back to the FBI. Now
they sent
him up as the patsy, but imagine to send a telex to every office of the FBI in the United States in one shot. You have to know a special code. You have to put that code into the telegram that will disseminate it to every office, as opposed to just going to Washington or just going to the Dallas FBI. So that is a significant finding. Mention that we to the FBI.
What other players in the FBI
were? Who probably had shot them? Well, you have to include Clyde Tolson, the second in the FBI, Carta Deluge, depending on how you spell it, DELOACH, Carta Deluge. A lot of the FBI agents did their jobs. I have to say that I have great respect for FBI agent Vincent Drain and Arthur Carter. They're the ones who conduct the Tippit investigation, as well as Robert Fresno and Siebert, the ones who accompanied the body from Dallas to Bethesda, and they were the ones who noticed. Having seen the body immediately after the shooting in Trauma Room 1, when the body was presented in Bethesda, they recognized instantly that something was wrong. The head looked differently. So to their eyes, they thought that surgery had been performed to the top of the skull. They didn't realize the surgery that they were noting of the skull of President Kennedy, but surgery to the top of the skull of Officer J.D. Tippit, whose brain was substituted for that of the president because his brain was intact. It was a whole brain and it had one bullet hole through it. So presenting that brain to the autopsist, they could only come to one conclusion: that one bullet through the head had killed the person who wore that. But they were told it was President Kennedy's, not Tippit,
Now
look-alike
you've done something
for the
fascinating.
president.
Speaking of the fact that Officer Tippit is a lookalike, you painstakingly have taken a
That's a
photograph.
cover up. That's a cover up. That's a assassination. There's one thing to hear me expounding on this thesis, but it's quite another to see the proof face to face. So if folks who are listening go to Google and type in JFK Morningstar.
Oh, and this is where you have that the painstaking picture of half the office, half of each face.
Practically the first image that will come out is a photo of President Kennedy's face on the left side and Officer Tippit's face. And it's right. Below the eyebrows, the hairline was different, the color of the hair was different, but the bone structure, the cheeks, the jaw, the proportions of the face are almost identical. So that was the first insight. That was actually the second insight. Third insight. The first insight was that the film was totally bogus, a hoax, a hallucination, a consciously engineered optical illusion and a mass hallucination. From there, I went to investigating the autopsy, and I came to the conclusion that Officer Tippit's brain had been used to fool the autopsist. But lo and behold, within a year, as I started to accrue more and more photographs of Officer Tippit, recognize more and more of his fake characteristics, I realized that none of the photographs that I had been studying from the purported Bethesda photographs of President Kennedy were actually President Kennedy. They were actually Officer J.D. Tippit. And the proofs are staggering, and they are geometric proofs. And that's why I have not had a rebuttal. I have not had anyone debunk my work.
Mm-hmm.
Some they're geometric proofs. These are theorems. You can beat down a theory that's based purely on linguistics and verbal argument. We're working with pictures and geometry and trajectories. It's hard to argue against the science of geometry. And that's what geometry really is, science.
Now, Officer Tippit, in order for him to be used, or his brain to be used, especially since you were able to show how he looked
So that's
identical
to
JFK,
done it,
right?
And I continue to promote my work and to awaken people to how deep the deception is. So much so, friends of the Dallas Police Department used to rib him, and they used to call him Jack and JFK, which was not a nice thing to be called in 1963. It was really something to get you goat. So go on, John.
Well, for the fact that Officer Tippit was killed,
he was really a very dedicated American.
Well, like I said, if Officer Tippit was killed and he looked identical to JFK to the point that you were able to show Tippit. Okay, Tippit. If he was killed again because his brain was needed to be used and he looked very strikingly similar to JFK. Obviously, if they had planned to kill JFK, so much so, like you said, they stopped his telegram that went through all the FBI offices. They pulled the Secret Service detail. They opened up a bunch of windows on Elm Street and all over Dealey Plaza. That means they would have had to stake out Officer Tippit and plan on executing him not too long after JFK was assassinated.
Exactly so.
How far back do you think the planning goes for Officer Tippit?
This plan was a master plan. Oh, I think that once he gets away, who President Kennedy and new Officer Tippit.
Did you say they knew each other?
And the answer, excuse me? A person who knew both people, one person who knew President Kennedy personally and knew Officer Tippit personally was Lyndon Johnson.
Ah, okay, okay. And as we know, he had a big hand to play in the assassination of the president.
Right. But let me say this. John's party, Carousel Club, on November 8th, she herself told me this. She told me that Lyndon Johnson and the bigwigs were celebrating a pre-inauguration victory party. But the election wasn't until 1964, you know?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Whose election was he? Well, whose inauguration was he celebrating? A year before the still undecided 1964 election. That gives you a hint there. So he's in Jack Ruby's Carousel Club with Madeline Brown, LBJ's mistress, and Ruby to the table. They show our president's motorcade. And he shows it with great pride that 2 weeks before the assassination, well, they weren't talking about assassination. 2 weeks before the president's visit, Jack Ruby is sporting this map showing the proposed motorcade route. And Madeline Brown was really surprised. And she says to him, "Well, Jack, you're really in with the Great White Fathers, I see." And when she said that to me, that was in 1995 and 96 and 97. We had long conversations on the phone. We met in Dallas in 98. That took me back to 1960 when I had a conversation with a boyhood friend, a grammar school friend, when we were talking about, we were discussing Peter Kennedy and spiritual power. So when we finally got to the nitty gritty, we decided the Pope didn't have any. So of course we happened. So I said Kennedy was the most powerful person on earth.
Yes.
And then my friend said this very strange thing. He says, "That's not what my daddy says." I said, "What?" He says, "That's not what my father says." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "My father says that it's the Great White Fathers who tell the president what to do." I said,
"Oh,
who are the Great White Fathers?" He said, "Well, nobody knows who they are." I said, "Well, let me see. Catholics have the Pope, and they have Pope. Your father's Protestant. Who do you guys listen to? Do you have a Pope?" And he said, "No, we don't have a Pope. We have the Great White Fathers." And I said, "The Great White Fathers, plural, right? Because we've all heard the term in all the Indian movies, you know, of the 1940s and 50s, you know, referring to the United States as the Great White Father in Washington, right? But this was plural. And I said to him, "Well, who are they?" And he says, "Nobody knows who they are, but what to do." Flabbergasted me. No, I'm talking to me. Jesus.
the Great White Fathers."
Says,
Robert sounds to me like Majestic 12 or some other cabal group.
"Well, and right. These were the Texas bigwigs. This included the Dealey brothers, who published the Alice Morning News, R.L. Thornton, after whom the Thornton Expressway is named. H.L. Hunt, Clint Murchison, Sid Richardson, all of the big oil men. And they all used to meet in Houston in a particular hotel, and it had a Suite 8F. And it was in Suite 8F that Johnson, these big wigs, J. Edgar Hoover, all of them used to get together for high stakes poker games. And that apparently is where the plot was the finance plot was worked out. But the actual assassin was layers within layers within layers. It was shelled, and it was run. We now know it was run by the official mission, which was run from Spain by a former Nazi commando named Otto Skorjeni. Skorjeni, so in Nazi Germany, he was the one who rescued Mussolini from prison on top of that mountain where they had him in a castle. So after the war, he became a paperclip Nazi, and he started to run assassinations. His front was he was an engineer, an engineering office in Madrid, Spain, and conducting assassinations in Central and South America and the United States. And I've been told by Major Ralph P. Gannis, the author of the Skorjeni paper, that he had the assassination apparatus working inside the United States across the South, from Florida to New Orleans to Dallas, had been working for 10 years. So it was nothing new. They just had to turn the direction of the guns from Kennedy.
Wow. When you mentioned the Great White Fathers, Robert, are the Bushes part of it, because we know how influential Prescott Bush was, and George H.W. Bush being part of the CIA and having a handful in JFK. And we also know Prescott Bush was a huge financier of the Nazis.
Yes, he have to his son, his meaning old guys here, right? So, but George Bush, H.W., worked his way up, and eventually he became the Don. Now, the Don of a vast international org, which is the Central Intelligence Agency.
Mm-hmm.
They financed the black operation, kept them out of Congress's oversight with black money, meaning drug trafficking,
gun running.
Prostitution.
Yeah, gun running was a huge thing for them.
Weapons. You know, the perfect example is the Iran gun run. Yeah, it was like the to go to America, sell them in America, take the money, go down to the Caribbean, buy rum, take the rum down by slaves. It's very much like that, a triangular trade that involved vast operations opposed in dark alliance. He paid with his life for that. Expose Gary Webb, God rest his soul. San Jose Mercury News. And so gun running, drug running, prostitution, and other criminal actions. Like, how about selling uranium to the Russians?
Yeah, and also, didn't they have some hands in some oil? I mean, at least I know.
Be Joe Blow, steal something. That's the kind of operation now. Helped the oil industry maintain its privileged position. The oil industry proved the CIA's ideas that undersea drilling was feasible. And George H.W. Bush became the cutout of the first drilling operations to try to bring oil out of the submarine terrain. And interestingly, oil platforms were stationed just north of Cuba, just beyond their international waters. And it was from those Zapata oil
Zapata, yeah. George
drilling
H.W.
attacks
Bush
were being conducted against Castro by the rogue elements of the sea. Yeah, he was also in charge of the Bay of Pigs. He was the commander, George H.W. He lost millions in his investments for his buddies, millions worth of prestige. Very likely. He had forbidden any American air support. And the CIA was so inept. I have to tell you this. The CIA was so inept. They arranged for air support, a couple of people to be outfitted with machine guns and a couple of bombs so they could strafe the beach. Those idiots in Langley screwed up the timetable.
Huh.
They forgot that Nicaragua was an hour off the time zone for Cuba. And so the planes late and arrived late.
Talk about a operational screw up to the 10th degree.
By then it was all just too late. And sunk. It actually turns out that Castro knew all about the plans. Castro's spy agency was so vast and efficient that he had forewarning, and the reports are actually there waiting for it to happen, and that he was actually firing some of the cannons that sunk the Barbara and the Houston, which were named after Barbara Bush and his adopted city, where the Great White Fathers used to meet in Suite 8F. A particular hotel there. I told you about drug running operations. Gary Webb paid for this. It's in a book called Dark Alliance. The other aspects of this are in other books. Family of Secrets by Russ Baker says explicitly that George H.W. Bush and Thomas Crichton raised $2 million for the assassination from the bigwigs, the big oil men. And let's see, the other book. It'll come back to me. I don't like to cite these things because I want you to know, A, it's history. B, I owe it to other people. I stand on the shoulders of giants, people who gave their lives information to you, that you know who the players are. You know what the stakes are. The stakes, we are fighting to take back the republic that was stolen from us on November 22nd, 1963.
Robert, let me say this. One of the great documentaries that I've seen that's really woken me a lot to what happened with JFK was Dark Legacy. Have you ever had a chance to see that?
Oh, yes, many times. John Hankey. Yes, there's a series. John Hankey and Dark Legacy. Connolly. Then The Unfortunate Truth about JFK, 9/11, and Beyond, also by Francis Richard Connolly. I mentioned the last two in particular because he used my work as the script for his his film, and he does a very, very good job. He does the best scene of the Tippit autopsy angle and the doctoring, not only of the JFK autopsy, but the doctoring of Tippit's body by a master mortician named John Levitt. He and his wife, you know, there are a couple of Epistry Channel that are still available on YouTube. They are not allowed to be broadcast again because of lawsuits, but they're on YouTube, and one of them is called The Smoking Guns, and that's where you find out about John Liggett, Ligget, and Liggett was kind of like the Michelangelo of Morticians. He's a real artist, so he was able to take Tippit's body and dress it up to make it look more like President Kennedy. For example, covering up certain moles that President Kennedy didn't have, but he didn't cover them all up because Tippit had a lot of moles, including on his ear. Hairline was a problem. Tippit was part of hairline on both sides. And the hair was radically different, which is what had to do the surgery that I referred to earlier, noticed by the two FBI agents, Siebert, and who noticed that obviously surgery had been performed to the top skull, quote unquote. And a lot of algebra. Because I'd like to say this. I've been very successful in this affair and the other because of two things that I studied assiduously. One of them was geometry, sacred geometry in particular, which I've mentioned, but the other one is algebra. And folks, you hear that word, you think of high school. People start running. I had a wonderful teacher, Mr. Donald Cunard at Power Memorial Academy. And he came and realized how important algebra would become in my everyday life and in my everyday thinking. Because if you learn one simple rule from geometry and from algebra, which is if A equals B and B equals C equals A. Okay? That's it in a nutshell. If you know that logic, then you know how to work with facts and you know how to pick apart distraction and deception. You can eliminate false leads that are placed in your way, and you are able to see where the distraction and turn your eyes in the right direction of investigation. Hard for you to understand this at this time, but when you start studying algebra and you see how you can take a problem like the JFK assassination and write an algebraic equation. That's what I did with President Kennedy's body and the time from Parkland. There was a timeline whose body was taken from the site where he was shot to Methodist Hospital and then down to Parkland Hospital. So at one point, both ambulances and both bodies were there. This is, again, I worked this out using algebraic equations and timelines to prove that Tippit was killed earlier than the Warren Commission says.
So he wasn't killed after JFK then?
Oh, he was killed after JFK, but not as late. They say in order to try to make Oswald the killer of Tippit, they had to have him kill Tippit before he went into the theater. But Oswald actually went into the theater around 1 o'clock, latest 1:05. He was already watching a movie, was killed after Oswald was in the theater. What can I do? Remarkable thing. And Oswald and two Dallas police officers at fabricate a narrative to place Oswald at the scene of Tippit's murder. So it's a very convoluted timeline that that the Warren Commission had to rig to make it possible for Oswald to shoot the president, to go home, change his shirt, grab a jacket, then go to the theater. And to make all of it fit.
Do you know why? Because I've always wondered this since honestly, as long as I've been alive, knowing about JFK and the so-called mainstream story. What was the purpose, aside from what the mainstream is telling us, of why Lee Harvey Oswald even went to the theater?
Well, that's the interesting point. Only a person who is involved. See, he was there to meet somebody else, right? The part of the plot, he was supposed to do his job, but he realized that he was supposed to be killed. Oswald was supposed to be killed at the Texas School Book Depository. They were supposed to, quote unquote, catch the killer there. But he was a very well-trained intelligence operative. This guy had snuck into Russia and got a job in a Russian. He'd got out with a trophy wife, you might say, for the CIA. Then he brought back a trophy wife. She was the daughter of a high-ranking MKB colonel, like a colonel in the FBI of the Soviet. So he was her uncle.
I didn't know that.
She was kind of an intelligence prize, but at the same time, she was a Russian spy. The spies that they call sparrows. They indoctrinate them from the time they were children in Komsomol, the communist Girl Scout and Boy Scouts, to do it for Mother Russia. You know what I mean?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Do it patriotic for Mother Russia. Well, these sex spies were sent out, and JFK had an affair with one of them from Germany, actually, and that was one of the great concerns for J. Edgar Hoover and the military-industrial establishment, that he was consorting with East Germans, prostitutes, they thought, because she was doing the diplomatic scene in Washington. She was the wife of a West German. She was the wife of a West German diplomat stationed in Washington, but she was of East or German origin.
Stasi.
And so she was bedding down a lot of diplomats and government officials. And Kennedy liked the Nordic types, you know his story in World War II, and his affection for a Danish Nazi. He fell in love with a Danish Nazi, and that was another big scandal that they had to hide. Along with his first marriage. Oh, brother.
What was his first marriage? To? He
was married to another woman. I forget her name, but Hoover found a document, and it turns out he married an older woman when he was very young, like in 1946, and apparently his father flipped out, and he had the marriage annulled through the string pulling.
Joe Kennedy, yeah, the patriarch of the family.
Right. Well, one of the grandsons of Joe Kennedy had the same thing done, which is impossible to do. Annulment in the Catholic Church. It's an almost impossible task. But the Kennedys have been able to pull off two of them.
Yeah.
Yep. So you mentioned the Great White Fathers and MJ-12. Yes, indeed. There was an overlap in the military-industrial complex. There were people who knew about it, were not themselves MJ-12 members, but they were privy to it, and they were funding a lot of the operations as well. One of the first people to know about the crashed UFOs was Howard Hughes. The crash of the UFO, not the Roswell crash, but another one in Arizona, I believe the Aztec crash. The first people to come upon that crash were a group of Boy Scouts and a group of oil surveyors. And when you're dealing with oil surveyors,
is also New Mexico, right?
Aztec, New Mexico, Kingman, Arizona. Yes.
Kingman is Arizona, yes.
Yeah, so they were really pretty smart guys that got to see this flying saucer, the crashed, the retrieved disc in that crash site. And they arrived long before the Army did, so they were able to scurry about and get inside the craft to see what was in it. But when the Army arrived, they swore everyone to secrecy. And of course, everyone was a good patriot in the immediate aftermath of World War II. And so they did keep the secrets. But some of the Boy Scouts and some of the surviving oil surveyors told their stories in the 1990s. So Howard Hughes, and who better than Howard Hughes to take a UFO and reverse engineer it? Who had the wherewithal? Who had the industrial power to do that? Hughes Tool Factory, right? Hughes Tool Company. He could have done it.
Hughes was also present in the 1954 meeting with Eisenhower, Einstein, and a handful of other folks at was then Muroc Air Force Base, or Muroc Airfield, now Edwards Air Force Base, when Eisenhower, along with his entourage, met with, I believe it was 2 distinct extraterrestrial species.
Yeah, I've heard 2 stories about it. One is that he met with the Greys, and the Greys demanded immediate nuclear disarmament, and Eisenhower said no. The other story I've heard is of a landing at Holloman Air Force Base, but that would be after, the Holloman Air Force Base landing would be after Eisenhower had left office. That would have been around 1964. And that's supposedly Anunnakis, right? If you know that story. That these were the aliens that were tall and had big long noses and high cheekbones, and for all intents and purposes, they looked like the gods in the Anunnaki cuneiform paintings and drawings.
So 64, you're talking about LBJ was president then.
Yeah, that would have been, as I understand it, it was about 64. It was early 60s for the Holloman experience, and that the Muroc thing was 54. The Eisenhower.
Yeah. I didn't know that LBJ met with them, but hey, I mean, at this point, I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh, I didn't say LBJ met. No, LBJ didn't meet with the aliens. I'm just saying the landing occurred.
Oh, do you know who was present in the greeting party?
It was Air Force. They made an approach. They made an approach to the Air Force base. They parked themselves off the end of a runway and were stationary. Then some signaling went back and forth between the tower and the UFO. Then the UFO slowly approached the runway and alighted, let down boarding ladders, and out came these guys that actually looked like the Anunnaki. This was a story that was told to, what's his name? Robert Entenman or something like that. He did a really great video or movie for Disney, and they were offering him special footage of this landing at the Air Force Base, which he got to see. If you give me a moment, I'm sure I can. Emenegger. I don't even have to look. It came back to me. Emeneggar. Robert Emenegger, producer. He produced that Walt Disney video, or not video, film then. It's video now. That goes into the whole UFO history, goes into UFO alien contact, and it was part of the Tomorrowland exhibit that they were doing down at Disney World in Florida in the early 1980s. So it seems that Nixon had set the gears in motion for a disclosure to occur, and it was heading in that direction. But then they got cold feet and they pulled the film. So what he got to do was to draw alien as they looked to an artist who had seen the film. By the way, I have in my hand right here, I think one of the most important documents ever released about UFOs, and it's called Estimate of the Situation. And it dates back to the time of Project Sign in 1947. Let me see. I was going to tell you. It comes from this document. Let's see. Yeah, the document is from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Majestic MJ1. The address is classified to the office of the president. It is called of the situation, and it was detailing the crash retrieval of the UFO that crashed at Roswell and the recovery of one of the pilots and the interrogation of one of the pilots. And what the pilot said to the United States Air Force and to MJ-12 is amazing. It turns out that Nikola Tesla, pardon the expression, it comes from the movie The Right Stuff, Nikola Tesla screwed the pooch.
Really?
Okay?
Nikola Tesla screwed the pooch?
Yes. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Because the Roswell aliens would not have shown up if Nikola Tesla had not messed up their gravitational field with the experiments he started doing in the 1920s. This document.
Tesla, I've always been fascinated with him because after he died, the FBI took all his notes.
The aliens said, right, and hid them and probably disseminated. Well, you know who got to read? President John Trump, who was a PhD at MIT. So let me tell you what the alien said. He said that they came here to the Earth because a scientist in the 1920s had sent out a very powerful signal that went out across the galaxy. And when it got to start gravitational field. So they sent a signal back telling him to turn it off.
And you said this was 1920.
Tesla didn't. But remember, this is a signal from outer space that he thought came from Mars. But apparently it came from way farther away. And it was asking him to stop doing what he was doing. So then the Tesla did stop. He kept experimenting with this particular type of energy, which the aliens themselves say was a fluke, that Tesla discovered it 100 years before his time, before anybody could even have conceived it, that's how far ahead Tesla was in electronic theory. And there is some suggestion that Tesla is a descendant of a race of aliens that were planted in Yugoslavia thousands of years ago, because the alien refers to the country of Yugoslavia as one of the places where they landed over 4,000 years ago and left technology and they left knowledge. So anyway, this document, this official government document, refers to Tesla as an outlaw scientist because he was unbound, you know? He was not bound by military-industrial contracts, and they had no control over him. He was loose cannon, as they say. So that's the reason they came. When he didn't turn off the experimentation, they sent a mothership with scout ships to try to find out who was doing this thing and try to make them cease and desist because he was disrupting the gravitational stability of their planet and other environment, because this beam was going out in all directions and interacting with their gravitational fields. So yeah, he put a whammy on them, and they came out to see who was the guy that was doing it.
Do you know what this beam was consisted of? Because clearly
you can get this document by going to majesticdocuments. No, even modern. It says here that scientists, the government scientists, had no idea what that frequency was. Test dealing a particular frequency that nobody else ever had discovered or applied or anyone else knew about. So they did not have the technology to understand it, to determine the exact frequencies that Tesla was using. But the aliens themselves said it was a higher form of energy than any of the others in the electromagnetic spectrum.
Hey, the reason I asked that, Robert, is because, in Puerto Rico, that giant dish, what's the name? Arecibo. We're still broadcasting using a basic rudimentary radio signal, and it just begs the question, why the heck are they still doing that when it's not getting results?
John, are you there?
Oh, absolutely. Can you hear me okay?
Arecibo
in Puerto Rico, yes. Still sending out BS signals, hoping that something rudimentary as a radio wave is what they're looking for.
It's a big. I hear you. Yeah. To pretend, however, certain from the galaxy, and it is definitely not of natural origin. The pulses are in rapid bursts. And they receive 13 rapid bursts of this signal, and all of them were the same. This is not noise. This is not some star burping or hiccuping out there in the outer galaxy. It's a directed beam. It came out about 2 weeks ago. A lot of people were perplexed. But the more important, New Yorker magazine, and it was by the top university, Globe. And he was harking back to a huge object that was rotating, and from the period of its rotation, a very regular rotation, and they could tell its shape, and they said that the shape of it was
What kind of shape are you talking about, Robert? Robert, you still there? Robert Morningstar. Earth to Robert.
Is Robert there?
That's what I'm trying to find out. He's connected. I don't see him saying anything, so let's find out here. Just as we're getting to the crux of this, and soon we're about to tie in what's happening today. I'm wondering if I should reset Robert's call here, see if that'll help at all. No, Robert is offline at the moment, so let's hang tight for him to come back. I don't know if you guys are able to hear him okay, unfortunately, on this end. And it almost begs the question, is somebody up top trying to prevent this information from coming out okay? Because, unfortunately, I seem to not be able to hear him. And this is not the first time or the first show. Fortunately, other people are able to, but I don't know why. Let's try bringing Robert again, and let's hope in the interim he is back on. I'm assuming something knocked him off, but because he knows so much, folks, and yeah, you could say this is conspiracy talk, but I would not be surprised if, because of him being the world expert on JFK and also literally being so full of knowledge on so many things, from ETs to black ops, like I said, JFK clearly, the matrix that we all live in, all of the above. I wouldn't be surprised if they are doing their best to keep him from sharing his stories, especially to such a massive audience that we are afforded right here on UPRN with all the terrestrial affiliates in AM and FM. throughout the continental United States and beyond. Okay, let's try Robert one more time, and let's see if he comes on. And folks, soon we'll be able to start taking calls. I apologize for you folks who have tried to call. I don't know if you guys have been able to hear or been following lately, but thanks to our friends at Microsoft, they sort of derailed our ability right now until things are fixed and patched up to accept a live call while we are on air without putting the station on hold. So until that little bug is fixed out, we have to work with what we got. Feel free to write the questions in, but I promise folks soon, feel free to call in anytime you want throughout the show. You don't have to wait for me to say I'll open the lines up, because the show, folks, is about you, the listener. Okay, real quick, let's try Robert back on now that he's back online. Let's see here. Robert Morningstar, where are you, buddy? Let's see. Let's try one more time, especially since I do see Robert. You
Hello.
back? There you are. We were wondering how, okay. So do you remember what you were saying before you got cut off?
Oh, I remember everything I said.
I'm talking about until the point you got cut off.
Cut off. Well, do you remember what I was saying?
No, because I'm having some issues hearing you. I've been trying to write you. It's been really choppy coming in, and I'm assuming other people are able to. So I have to base what I say to you on the handful I'm able to hear from you.
Talking about Oumuamua. Did you hear that?
Yes.
Okay, I've had pretty good. I was saying that a couple of things have happened. You were talking about Arecibo, okay?
Yeah, and then how we're still using this BS rudimentary.
And I said that's a cover story.
It's a cover up. That's right.
Kind of a fake science. Yeah, radio signals went right. So I went into the fact that about a week and a half ago, real signals were picked by Arecibo. Actually, it was University of Vancouver, British Columbia. They picked up streams of a signal that had structure that's not natural. For example, there's a natural signal to spinning without noise or sound, other things like that. They even, let me see, Saturn and Jupiter.
What about that wow signal that appeared in the 70s? One time, but it appeared.
They're putting out a song.
I'm sure you remember this, Robert. Do you remember that crop circle that we had sent out in binary showing the DNA strands?
I heard it. Yeah, it's similar to the WOW signal that came in about 30 years ago.
Yes.
But this one was very intense. Came from an alien, the signal. So University of Vancouver picked up 13 of these bursts that were not coming from our galaxy, and they showed structures, say that in the same Morse code as opposed to gibberish might be one way of describing it.
Binary. They were using binary.
A signal that has not been deciphered. The other thing I talked about during that break was Oumuamua. Last week, the chief astronomer at Harvard came out and said he harkened back to last October 19th when we were an unusual celestial object that came into our solar system at a speed that is at variance past the Earth down as it came past the Earth was very and going beyond the sun, but in a line that was not being affected by the gravitational field of the sun, which means some kind of propulsion was compensating for the natural draw or gravitational tug of the sun, or the warping of space-time, which is another way of thinking. The sun exits on objects moving. Dr. A.V. Loeb, L-O-E-B, says that he thinks that this thing was unnatural, that it was intelligent, perhaps, and that maybe the title of the article is "Have the Aliens Found Us?" Have the Aliens Found Us, in the New Yorker magazine, and he is a little bit perturbed by the skepticism of some of his colleagues, because he says it's very important to consider this, because nothing about this object was natural. He said that you could tell its proportion from its spin rate. He said it was spinning very slowly, and that the spin revealed that it was 10 times longer than it is wide, so that it would be shaped like a cigar. Or possibly, he said, that another shape that would give the same impression would be something shaped like a pancake. And I remarked about, that's a pretty funny word to use, pancake. Yeah. You know anything else? You know anything else that looks like a pancake flying around?
Disc, yeah.
Right, a disc shape. So he supposes that it could have been a cigar shape or a pancake shape. And in both cases, we have what we call motherships and flying saucers, which fit the bill.
Yes.
So here's the weird part. He said that really people should consider this seriously. So, quote unquote, so we're ready when the next visitor comes around, unquote.
Speaking of visitor, though, we've been bombarded by visitations in the last several years. I mean, wave after wave after wave globally, Robert. I mean, what do you think is causing this?
Well, I'll tell you what. In 2008 through 2010, I was involved with a movement, a proposal to bring about UFO disclosure through the United Nations, and it was a U.S. Navy initiative. In 2008, for the first time, the United States Navy controlled the Joint Chiefs of Staffs, Director of Central Command, and Director of the National, the NSA. So because Navy men were in those three positions, they had 10 months during which they had a chance to bring out disclosure, and they wanted to do it through the United Nations, because we had been told by the aliens that they wanted them, the government, to own up and let the people know that they are here. And they said, we're going to give you a couple of years. We have to intervene. You have pushed this planet too far towards self-destruction. And if you don't, we are going to openly manifest and reveal ourselves to the public. You have to tell your people that we're here, that we are peaceful, and that we're here to help with a lot of the problems that you have. And if you don't tell the people, we are going to make a mass manifestation. We're going to appear over some of your cities and let the people know directly that you are deceiving them. So I think that that's why we've been visited so much, why they have been all these strange objects videoed over all parts of the United States, all of China, Russia, pyramidal UFOs over the Kremlin.
And a pyramid UFO that was filmed on two different angles that's posted on Third Phase of the Moon. They did some fabulous journalism by capturing two different angles over the Pentagon.
Yes, indeed. Well, that's not the first time. I have photographs in my archives of a mass overflight of the Pentagon in 1946. These were yellow-colored UFOs. They looked like, they might look like blimps, but they were too flat, but they were yellow. And there were about 4 of them just hovering over the Pentagon. And some fellow on a highway had been driving by and shot a couple of photographs and kept them secret years. Then he died and left them to his son. or a friend of his, and he released. It's nothing new, really. As I said, there's all these sets of conspiracy, but it's all falling apart. We are at where that is drawn back the curtain, and the man behind the curtain, the Wizard of Oz, is exposed.
I think in the next 3 decades, Robert, that he will be exposed. Maximum. What says you?
And we've gotten pretty enlightened over the last 56 years. Well, I think that being up to deception is not totally has been part and parcel of the every year for 50 years. The mass media has engaged in mass public deception, despite all of these 36 years of educating the public. I'm not the only one that sees the splice marks now. People, ordinary people. Now look at the Zapruder film, and their eyes aren't being fooled like they were.
No, that's a fact. I've seen the Zapruder film since I was a child and knew the bullet came from
because in the process of exposing the JFK assassination, your consciousness has to have expanded so that, right, well, the tricks don't work on us. Our eyes have been opened to see, and the tricks then are not as effective now. Here's another thing I like to tell people to do. Protect yourself against commercial television. When the commercials come on, put on the mute. Because a big part of the attack is really, a blacked out shadow figure coming out talking about, his car problems and his insurance problems, and he's just a black silhouette, like shadow people. It's a facsimile of those aliens that they call shadow people. They're just a black form, black silhouette. So he comes out and he starts talking about his problem, and somebody who's walking by on the boardwalk says, "Hello, Mr. So-and-so," and he realizes that he's been recognized. And this black silhouette runs over to the banister and commits suicide. He just jumps into New York Bay. Makes no sense to me at all, except, as I've said to people, whenever commercials are being applied, they know that there are two things that will make you remember the product: sex and death.
Yeah.
Sex and death. And that goes way back to the 40s and 50s. So this is one that uses death to imprint the commercial on you. But I'll tell you, Liberty Mutual, as I said about Nikola Tesla, they really screwed the pooch on this one, because it's a very disturbing commercial of a black man. For all intents and purposes, it's a black person, right? For a moment, there's a flash of light that suggests a face. You don't really see the race, but the fact that the whole silhouette is black. And then the guy goes and takes, pardon the expression, he takes a jump in the lake. But it's New York Bay. And as a person who sailed the waters of New York for 10 years with a paramilitary organization during the 10 years after 9/11, I can tell you the waters of New York Bay are lethal. Nobody survives. And for them to just frivolously depict somebody just on a lark jumping into New York Bay, that's suicide. And I think it's very sinister. The way it plays on, look what it's done to me, right? And this is happening in the background because the soundtrack is what hooks you. And then all of this is playing, and most people don't pay attention to it, but your subconscious is picking it up. And it's a suggestion of death and a suggestion of committing suicide. So there's very sinister stuff being applied to our psyches. So you have to protect yourselves.
How many people would you say have fallen victim to this death and suicide because of what this subconscious message has been sent out and implemented in these people?
Oh, I think it's happening scores of times a day. I think that many, many people are being put into either depressions or frenzies by a lot of the material that is subliminally being downloaded to them through commercials and through broadcast, what they call broadcast journalism, or documentaries or infomercials. It's very bad stuff. I feel it's very unhealthy, very bad for children in particular. You know, when we were kids, John, commercials had a semblance of reality. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
There was a storyline. There was a real radio, and a real radio falling off a ladder and hitting the floor and breaking, which is what you would expect, right? That's a reality storyline. But now with computer graphics and all of these phantasmagoric, computer-generated creatures, I don't understand how children can really get a full grasp of what is real. And they're substituting virtual reality for real reality. They're becoming habituated to violence through games, gaming, those sports, shooting sports. And I think once a child is habituated to shooting in an arcade game, it desensitizes you to the reality that can just as easily be triggered and pick up a gun and start shooting at people as if they're just shooting in an arcade in a video game. And it has to do with how a person is educated nowadays. And I spoke about this educational theories on my show about 2 weeks ago on Revolution Radio, that originally Western society would allow the child to develop organically, physically, mentally, for a couple of years. So the development of the child's mind and nervous system took a natural path. Mm-hmm. There is an unnatural way of doing it, which is educating the child while he is developing. And this came from Russia. This came from the Soviet Union. This idea that to create this new man, Russia was always into, we're creating the new man, the new communist ideal. No family, no loyalty except to the state, the perfect proletariat. So they got the idea that it was better to do the education while the child is developing, so that then the indoctrination is hardwired into the person's nervous system, and it's impossible for that person to extricate themselves because their development and their neurological education are superimposed. It's, as I say, hardwired. Now, that theory came into Western education in the 1970s. It was adopted. These are the theories of Lev Vygotsky, 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 a Russian educator. And he got this idea. And this is the idea that was adopted in New York City's educational system and then branched out and fleshed out and went out as the Common Core curriculum, is to get the kid while he's developing so that you hardwire the indoctrination into the child. And a lot of it has to do with altering the child's natural perception of himself or herself, her identification. And this is where they start with gender bending. very early in grammar school. They start gender bending the child, cross-dressing in California.
Yeah,
you know,
it's picked up,
that
that's
kind
for
of thing.
sure.
Yeah. Well, so these are all the consequences. This is not how we were educated in the time of John F. Kennedy. It was after John F. Kennedy that they revamped everything so as to dumb down the nation and make it possible to keep us in a perpetual state of confusion.
And fear. And fear.
Fear, absolutely.
Now we have a little over 15 minutes left, Robert. We could talk about anything you want to continue on this line. But at the same time, I think it's not a bad idea if we tie in what we started to talk about the beginning, because everything you've been saying really still has an effect with what's going on today.
Yes.
The parallels between JFK and Trump, the difference of what the children were learning then versus now, the cognitive dissonance that exists, the amount of fear that is skyrocketed in the amount of propaganda that's being fed from us. And of course, you have the Dems. I don't even like to use the word Democratic Party anymore because they're so far from democracy at this point. They're socialists.
I'd like to say this. I wish you'd heard my show on Sunday on Revolution, because the subject was how Bolsheviks have taken over the Democratic Party exactly as they did 100 years ago in Russia. Let me tell you what this means. And this is a warning to Democrats. I do hope Democrats are listening. Folks, I was a Democrat almost all my life. And then my eyes were opened after Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton killed all the people at Waco and at Ruby Ridge and the Murrah building and the drug running from Mena, Arkansas. You got to wake up sometime. And that came to me in the mid-'90s.
Barry Seal, you're talking about Mena, Arkansas, right?
Yeah, all of that, But let me warn the Democrats. Something very sinister has happened and is happening right now. Bolsheviks, hardcore communists are taking over your party. Democratic does not mean communist. And you have hardcore communist Islamic sympathizers that have been infiltrating the Democratic Party for the last decade. In 1917, there was a revolution in Russia, popularly called the Russian Revolution, also popularly called the Communist Revolution. Let me apprise you of the facts. The Russian Revolution was a very successful democratic revolution led by a man named Alexander Kerensky. His model was the United States. The Russian model for their government, for their future government, in October of 1917 was the United States government system, a representative democracy. Within a month, the Bolsheviks took over. The Bolsheviks, as they say, horned in, like a bull, killing people, coercing people, murdering opponents. They made Kerensky flee the country. And they hijacked the revolution to turn it into a communist revolution. Now, what is the first thing that the communists did, the Bolsheviks did, when they took over the democratic revolution of Alexander Kerensky? A civil war broke out.
Cool.
The red and the white. And the Bolsheviks murdered the Democrats. Okay? Folks, I'm warning you. You are being taken over by Communism. The Democratic Party is now controlled by Communism, and that is the union of communism and Islam. And the leadership of the Democratic National Committee and the newly elected fecal-mouthed representatives from Minnesota, the Muslim women who are in there, denigrating the president, insulting him, calling him MF. Well, that's a warning, folks. And they're using women. They're using women and femininity to try to hijack the entire Democratic Party to communism. And I see it. History repeats itself. Those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it. And what I see happened between October and November of 1917 with the Bolsheviks taking over a democratic revolution, I see happening now in the Democratic Party. Because I look upon the congressional election as a democratic revolution in 1916. But communists are hijacking the party, and they're only going to lead it to self-destruction.
And it's actually really sad that that's where it's going to. But the biggest question is, why would they want it to implode unless, of course, they thrive in chaos? Because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But it seems here they want to break it on purpose, I guess. What, to fund more of the military-industrial complex, or to bring people to their knees?
Oh, I think just to not to bring the people to their knees. They want to bring the people to their feet and march them in the name of a wrong cause. Americans are not communists. We are not here to be communists. We are here to become individuals. That's the promise of America. That's the richness of America. Individual thinking, individual initiative, self-reliance. What they are creating is a mob. And you said the word, they are thriving in chaos because they're following a playbook, the devil's playbook, the rules for radicals. It is a book for seeding perpetual chaos and civil strife in a society. It teaches you never to be satisfied with any gains, that whenever anyone complies with your demands, to make other demands until you strip them all of patience and power, to make as much noise as possible, to scare your opponent, to intimidate.
And that's essentially what's happening right now when you see the left. They're intimidating the right. You have Maxine Waters publicly telling people to, if you see a Republican or someone in Trump's cabinet, be sure to harass them. Don't let them sleep. Don't let them eat. Well, hold on a second. What about all the crimes that people would be committing in that case? Why aren't the tables turned? And that's kind of why I was a little happy when Pelosi went to Florida and she got that same treatment by the Republicans.
I think it's fine. You see, what I really am enjoying, and I really am enjoying this, it's like the last 2 years have been the happiest of the last 50 since Kennedy was killed. I really feel the country is back on the right track of history. We've got a president who knows how to wield the U.S. Constitution. I said that on the show Sunday. I said, wield the Constitution. Wow, what a concept. Yes, wield the Constitution. The Constitution confers powers on all of us. It confers rights, but it also confers powers and authority on all of us if you know how to wield the Constitution. The Constitution is there to empower everyone, from the President of the United States to the lowliest baggage handler at LaGuardia Airport, with his rights and power that's invested in you to find out what the government is doing. You have a right to know what the government is doing, and the FOIA request is the one that comes down and devolves as the basic right of every American citizen to find out what your government is doing for you or to you. And they've been doing a lot to us that hasn't been good for the country. But that's all changed, and things I believe are getting for the better. I do enjoy battle. I do enjoy watching what's happening. I think the president is handling it perfectly well. I think he knows how to use the Constitution and its constitutional powers. I think the Democrats are making fools of themselves and are only going to lead themselves to destruction. But it's going to become violent. They've embarked on a violent path by following Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals, which is dedicated to Lucifer. And I would remind everyone who Lucifer is. Jesus called the devil the father of lies, right? And I think that is pretty self-evident in the way the media has been treating news, especially yesterday with the attack on the Catholic boys from Covington, Kentucky. I thought that boy was holding his own very, very, in a very manly way. He wasn't being aggressive. They were talking about the fellow who was standing near the Native American drummer. And the media has twisted that story and inverted it to inside out. So this is how the father of lies operates. We call it the Easter Bunny in the news, you know. There's
Yeah.
there's a great, you know what I'm talking about, right? There's that
Yes.
great segment on YouTube where, oh, the Easter Bunny today, the Easter Bunny. Yeah, well, they give an Easter Bunny rap every day, and if it isn't impeach, it's investigate. But
Yep.
it's
Indict is another one I keep hearing a lot lately.
political farce. They're desperate, my friend. Look at their faces. Look at the faces. I tell my friends, look at the faces on people on CNN and MSNBC. They are so glum. They are so angry. They almost never laugh. They almost never smile. And then the people on Fox News, they're just placid and cheerful and just give you the news, which is good
Yeah,
news.
CNN, MSNBC, all those networks, literally since November 2016, they have not been happy campers.
Well, of course, they started believing their own lie. I mean, what will cause greater cognitive dissonance in a person than for him or she to write up a narrative, a completely bogus storyline, fill it up with fake statistics like Steve Kondracki on MSNBC every night telling us, oh, 85% are going to vote for Clinton. No, he has no chance to win. Blah, blah. Day after day, night after night, they started believing their own lie. And when their lie crashed, they crashed. And now it's all face-saving. Face-saving. Egos, they have to make it true that Hillary Clinton won. She didn't win anything. She lost by one of the largest margins in the history of the Electoral College. And thank God that the Founding Fathers put the Electoral College in place. Because if it were not for the Electoral College, folks, California and New York and Florida would rule the world. You would never get a candidate other than one that's been rubber stamped by California, New York, Florida, and Texas, I would add. But really, it would be New York and California that would be choosing presidents. But with this coup d'etat, let me just get back to the real fact. What is being exposed was an attempted coup d'etat by the FBI of President Trump to usurp the power that was invested in him by his election. And folks, we are so lucky that it has been outed, that it's being exposed. Because if the FBI had succeeded in putting Hillary Clinton into the Oval Office, the FBI would have been choosing the next president of the United States for the next 50 years.
Yeah, and you know what? So let me since we have a couple minutes left, Robert, because of everything that's happening and going back to the crisis at the border, which we mentioned right now, is the shutdown, as we talked about throughout the show, is a shutdown a consequence of JFK? And of course, you've shown the parallels why. And as you heard in the beginning, I talked about why I have such a strong stance against the illegal immigration problem. It's more than a problem at this point. It is a crisis. I mean, immigration reform has been a topic from both sides of the aisle for decades. Only recently has it become a one-sided problem, and that's why we are stuck at this impasse. So one thing I've noticed is that it's not just women and children coming. There's a lot of prayer rugs found, a lot of Pakistanis are coming, a lot of Chinese are coming, but the majority of the people are young men in good shape, almost like military men.
Exactly.
And who the hell is charging their cell phones and paying for their cell phone bills?
Well, you know, this is a very interesting question because USAID has been helping them, you know, of all people.
Soros has. I know
Soros,
that.
Yeah, Soros and USAID have been funding these people. And it is an invasion. And it is a threat. Listen, what we are being subjected to is a new weapon. And the concept was developed by Ayatollah Khomeini. When he went to France and was so well received and given an apartment and food and money to function there, He thought this is great. And what he did was he conceived of the idea of immigration as a weapon. And he started calling for mass immigration of Muslims into France and saying that they had to reproduce as quickly as possible because in 25 years they would be starting to take over the electorate. And that is the plan of the Democrats. They want to flood the country with illegal immigrants. And as California has already done, give illegal immigrants to vote. Is California still part of the United States?
Yeah, thankfully it is. They lost the Collexit.
Chinafornia. That's what I call it.
Fortunately, the Collexit never went anywhere. They were trying to divide, aside from seceding from the Union, separate California into 3 individual provinces / states. Thankfully, it never went anywhere.
Well, it would have been smart. Californians would have then have had 6 senators instead of 2. Dig that.
That's true. Absolutely true. But at the same time, with being at the state that has some of the largest border crossing, then I think the scales would be tipped so that even though the eastern side of California, anything that's not on the coast, is pretty much red, would probably be more blue. I could definitely see, even though the state is majority blue as it is, it would just be like, you can't even compare anymore. I think they would literally wipe out the reds completely. Yeah,
I would say that that's true, and that's the plan. I'm glad to say that there is good news from Europe. President Trump has started a revolution in Europe, too. And France and England.
Macron, yeah. Oh, yeah.
England is about to break out, and I hope they break out without a treaty. I told my English friends, just break out and don't look back. Then start renegotiating your treaties with every country in Europe, just the way President Trump broke out. He broke out of TPP, TPIP, NAFTA, and he has renegotiated all of them. And as you can see, the renegotiation has produced fantastic results. This is the greatest economy in my life. Since Kennedy, when Kennedy did the same thing, he gave a tax break. He reduced the tax rates in 1962. And that spurred the economy where people took the money. And he said, go out and buy a new washing machine, buy a color television, and consume
big ticket items.
Yeah. And so he got the economy really jump-started. And that economy was able to keep us going during the Vietnam War, even though imagine how rich we would have been if we had not gone into Vietnam.
Not
only rich in the resources that we lost, but rich in the lives that were sacrificed there.
And I hardly think the homeless population would be as large as I've seen it grow in the last 30 years if we didn't go to Vietnam. I mean, how great would it be just to wipe that part of our history, and if we can go back in time just to sort of prevent it. I mean, I understand the domino theory that JFK and the military advisors were worried about, this domino theory causing communism, but I don't think it would have really taken off to where they wanted to, because those nations that stayed communists are still communists right now, and those that never embraced it still to this day have never embraced it. Now, unfortunately, Robert, we are coming down to the end, and I wanted to ask 2 things of you. First of all, if you have a final statement that you'd like to sort of tie everything in together, I'm going to give you the floor, and when you're done with that, plug in everything that you have to offer, where people can see your newsletter, where people can see your work, where people can hear you.
Well, I would like to say, first and foremost, be grateful for the life you have. Be grateful for being an American. Be grateful for living in great times. We are engaged now in the 3rd great American Revolution. The first revolution was the American Revolution of 1776. The second revolution was the tragedy that we call the Civil War, or the War of Northern Aggression, depending on which side of the Mason-Dixon line you're on. And this is the 3rd American Revolution, the Trump Revolution, where we are going to restore the Republic to what President Kennedy had in mind as a democratic representative democracy. I would like to say, folks, tune in tomorrow to this same station, as I expect to be on at 9 o'clock, with my dear friend, Mr. Rowe, who's a radio host and a friend of mine on Revolution Radio. And Mr. Rowe, I'm invited to come on the show and explain to us Bitcoin and
yes.
cryptocurrency. And I plan to discuss with him the prospects of getting rid of the Fed, getting rid of the IRS, which is a rumor that's going around, and the prospect of transforming, resetting the economy, and switching over to a cryptocurrency, which is something that people are suggesting President Trump may do, that he may declare bankruptcy. And boy, that will the so-called Jubilee. So all of these things are of interest to me. We've all been hearing about them. And since Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are so important, I thought nobody better to get on the show than my friend Mr. Rowe, R-H-O, like the Greek letter, Rowe, as in Robert.
And that actually would be really fantastic, Robert, because I dabble with a little Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, and everything like that. And
Yeah.
I would like to see the Fed, the World Banks, the Trilateral Commission, and all those just close their doors.
Well, I think this is the answer. This is the answer. We've all heard about the coming indictments and the way that the bankers and the banksters looted.
Yep. And
the
anyhow,
treasury. Well, it seems that money may be coming back and redistributed to the public.
Yes.
And if the president is successful,
well,
we're looking forward to a very happy life for the next decade, I think, if he's successful.
Thank you, Robert. We have officially gone a couple minutes over, so I don't want to take my time for the next show. So with that being said, folks, join us on Thursday, same time, same place, as we bring on Mr. Sean Stone, son of Oliver Stone. Remember, YouTube channel at DRJ Radio Live, Dr. J Radio Live, website, drjradiolive.com, and every other social media outlet is the same as YouTube, at DRJ Radio Live. And with that being said, folks, there's other people to thank, but because I'm out of time, I'm just going to wish you all say to you all a good night and a happy or good morning for those of you in the UK. And now I'm signing off.